The waters melt and flow to the river. Through prairie grass, marshy bog, and oakwood, the waters run ever toward the river. Alive with the voices of the land, life returns each spring to the grove. For thousands of years, the people of this land lived along the rivers. First the Iowa and then the Meskwaki planted along the streams and hunted in the oak groves. The Treaty of 1842 opened the territory to white settlers. 1845 was the season of great sorrow for the Meskwaki people, as many were forced from their villages, fields, and hunting grounds and taken to reservations in Kansas territory. The surveyors came and divided the land into squares, counties, townships, sections, lots. The grove claimed by Josiah Hopkins, once known by its towering oaks and meandering creek, became Hopkins Grove, Section 20 in Madison Township, Polk County, in the newly formed state of Iowa. For Josiah and Mahala Hopkins and Alexander and Elizabeth Pierce, it was a season of hope, a chance to start a new life. The families came together by wagon train from Taney County, Missouri. They were not passing through, as were so many others. Theirs was the vision of the yeoman farmer. They were seeking to put down roots. They would raise their families, farm the land, and build a community. Benjamin Wiley wrote of the pioneers in 1916, "There was in 4 or 5 years a heavy settlement along the Big Creek and Des Moines River timber of the very best class of people, but wholly unorganized. All were Christians, as that term goes. Nearly all were members of or had belonged to some church where they last lived. Throughout the country, evangelical camp meetings were including the working class in a religious revival. The Hopkins timber became a popular site for camp meetings. One night, a circuit rider named John DeMoss preached a very powerful sermon. In a letter written in 1881, Reverend James Adams describes his part. "I arose and instead of preaching, sung my missionary song. I just felt like singing. The song was new to all on the ground, and it seemed to find every preacher's heart, and the members caught the sacred flame, and there was a general glory, hallelujah, all over the encampment." In 1851, at one of these camp meetings, the pioneers decided to build a church. The settlers had been members of so many different churches, and so there was a question of which denomination this church would be. It was decided that the church would be United Brethren. The ministers of other churches took out new license in the Brethren Conference, and Josiah and Mahala Hopkins donated a piece of land. The settlers cut logs, made clapboards, and in a few days, the Hopkins Grove United Brethren Church was ready for worship. The building also served as a school and was used by those who chose to remain Methodist until they could build their own church. A small section of land near the church was set aside for a community cemetery. By 1856, Josiah had established the 20-Mile House, which served as a stagecoach stop and a post office on the first road to venture north from Des Moines to Boone. The thriving villages of Polk City and Madrid were within 5 miles of Hopkins Grove, providing centers of trade. That year, Madison Township had 134 farmers who sold hogs, cattle, 9,000 pounds of butter, and almost 1,400 pounds of wool. They planted spring wheat, winter wheat, oats, potatoes, and corn. In the beginning, the fields were cleared from the woodlands. The settlers had no experience with prairie. They couldn't believe that land that didn't grow trees could support crops. Even after they realized the richness of the prairie soil, the sod was tough for their wooden plows to open. With the mass production of John Deere's steel plow, the prairie began to disappear. At that time, everything was abundant. Deep black soil, big trees for timber, and water power from Big Creek to mill the grain and saw the lumber. Prairie chickens' eggs were gathered by the apronful. Elk, bear, and wolf still roamed the woods. Flocks of ducks and geese darkened the sky. But a great storm was brewing. It covered the whole country with violence. The issues of states' rights and slavery could not be resolved. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln became president, and the great Union was torn apart. It would be a terrible time for the families of Hopkins Grove. Josiah Hopkins was a staunch abolitionist and was known to shelter escaping slaves at the 20-Mile House. By August of 1861, he and almost every other able-bodied man in the community marched off to war. Many would never return. Caswell Murray was one of the first to die. He left a wife and 6 children. He was 35 years old. Enoch Bigler was 20 and left his bride of 2 days. In a letter home, he speaks freely of his faith. "I thank God I have a praying father and mother. I believe in prayer. If a man ever needed prayers, it is in the Army, for he is surrounded with temptations. Pray for your sons in the Army. We don't hear preaching very often. Write and tell me how you all are getting along in religious matters, how the church is prospering, and whom you have for your preacher this year." Enoch died July 22, 1863. George Washington Grigsby had been married 15 months, leaving a wife and baby daughter. He wrote, "My dear Mary, the cannon is belching forth its deadly discharge. We truly need the prayers of all our friends at home, that if we do fall, we may be prepared. My dear wife, if I am never permitted to meet you on earth again, pray that we may meet in heaven. I sometimes think it doubtful whether we ever meet again in this life, but we will hope for the best and be prepared for the worst." George was wounded at Vicksburg and died on the way home. Those that did return found that life had changed. Later in his life, Civil War veteran Benjamin Wiley remembered the days that followed the war. 1865 found Hopkins Grove badly depleted. Disintegration was fast gnawing away the bands which held Christian fellowship in unison. Death, wounds, sickness, and sorrow. For 5 years, all was loss of membership, with no converts. One of the losses was that of Josiah Hopkins and his family. Disputes among the congregation led Hopkins to take his family to Kansas, where he died a few years later. It was a cold and wintry time at Hopkins Grove. Then, in January of 1866, a quarterly meeting was held, and afterward a revival. Suddenly, there were 150 new converts. There was a discussion of building a new church. The new church was built, not in the quiet grove, but on the road, several miles north. Once again, the Methodists suggested joining together to form a union church, but it was decided that the church should remain United Brethren. The first services were held in the new church in September 1866. In 1868, Hopkins Grove was host to the United Brethren Annual Conference. When the church hosted its second annual conference in 1884, most of the old pioneer preachers were gone. In their place were younger, more formally educated men. It was a prosperous time for most of the farmers of Hopkins Grove. In 1902, Biddy Eslick Snyder, a participant in the first camp meeting, died. She named in her will $500 toward building a new church. For 2 years, planning the new building was foremost in the thoughts of the community. On September 4th, 1904, the members of Hopkins Grove gathered proudly on the steps of their new church. The wealth of the land and the vision of the people came together that day and the new century promised all that was good. The world was changing. Railroad and telegraph, and soon telephone, automobiles, and electricity would bring new ways of living and working to Hopkins Grove. The church in the center of the community would change too. More efficient stoves and affordable sewing machines began to free the women from some of the time-consuming duties in the home. In 1900, the Hopkins Grove Ladies' Aid Society was formed. The women became an important factor in the financial and spiritual success of the church. In 1914, the decision to add a basement to the church was made.
There was always a little break, a lull between the Sunday school and the preaching service. And Charlie Helms stood up and asked to have the floor for a little while. He had something he wanted to say. And he thought it was getting about time that they should put a basement under the church. So there would be some place for the young people to hold their get-togethers, and for the ladies to have to do whatever they wanted to do.
Well, I think that the basement of the Hopkins Grove Church became a focal social center for this community.
Not everyone believed that the church was the place for these social functions.
Grandma Wiley was very opposed to this, very opposed. And I don't think she ever went, that I know, into that basement.
While the social function of the church took on a larger role, the evangelistic nature of the services remained. The sermons were full of the fires of hell.
Charlie Lemming's one of the fellows that was saved here in this area and become an evangelistic preacher. I can remember when he come back and preached at the church. And the reason it sticks out in my mind so much from Charlie preaching here was one night we was here and he was preaching hell and damnation to everybody, and all at once he jumped up on the banister and started to talk. And to me, as a young fellow, less than 10 years old, that was quite an experience, because nobody ever stood on that banister in the church.
The spirit of the church remained strong, even though the financial base was eroding with the farm crisis of the 1920s.
Oh, I think a lot of people lost their farms in the 20s. I remember hearing my folks worry about that.
I know we used to burn corn the corn wasn't worth anything, so we had to burn corn to keep in our stove to keep warm. It's a cheaper fuel than, it's as cheap as you could get then.
As the crisis deepened into the Great Depression, the people of Hopkins Grove struggled to provide for their families.
Us young folks didn't really know that there was a depression going on. But I think it was very hard on the older people that they had things and then all at once they had nothing. They had to make do with what they had. And this, I think anybody that went through the Depression, they left a mark on them that they never did get over.
The pattern of cooperation that had developed among the area farmers served to unite the people.
Well, of course, the requirements of survival at that time thrust people together. You couldn't accomplish the harvest season, whether it be small grain, filling silo, picking corn. All those things demanded cooperative action. There wasn't enough manpower on any one farm to get the jobs together that required crew activities.
My dad always ran the steam engine, and Clyde Shear, he was on the other. Took a lot of workers, and we used to have 20, 21, maybe up to 25 for dinner when they were thrashing, and that was quite a thing. We thought that was really great. I know my mother didn't have a refrigerator, electric refrigerator, and we had a cave, and we had an ice box, an ice chest down there that she'd have to go to town and get her meat in the morning.
The people of Hopkins Grove came together even closer as the hard times of the 30s led into World War II. In the half-century that followed the Civil War, the United States had fought the Spanish-American War and the First World War, but neither of these wars had the effect on Hopkins Grove that World War II would have. Young men and women who had grown up together in the shadow of the church were being called to war.
The Wiley boys left first, and then I left January the 9th of 1942, and I think my brother left in about 30 days later.
Some of the women chose to follow the men into the military.
Well, yes, we thought we could do our bit too. Even if we were women, you know, they were taking women in the service.
Some stayed behind to labor in the plants that fueled the war. Once again, not all the soldiers would return to Hopkins Grove.
I remember him mostly from the Christian Endeavor. He was quite active in that. And then when he went into service, it was the same as so many others were doing. At the time, you just think he's doing his duty and is going along the same as the other boys. But then when this time comes and he went down in the Mediterranean, then this was a very sad time.
The end of the war brought renewed hope to Hopkins Grove. By 1950, the old-fashioned tent meetings once again renewed the evangelical spirit of the church.
So we had meetings 3 or 4 weeks there at a time, every night. It was every night. You know, that tent would be packed full. It'd be full of people. We had a huge choir, big choir. You know, I sing in the choir then. After those meetings were over, then they had the baptismal down at the river. Well, we all went down to the river, and the girls wore their dresses to go in. And Connie didn't want Corinne to go in because she's afraid she'd drown, so Connie wouldn't go. Corinne went. She was so happy after that. She really was very happy.
A new vision was sweeping the country. The great factories that fueled the war were turned to domestic production. The high wages offered by the factories attracted families to the cities with the promise of comfort and security. With larger farms and fewer farmers on the land, the rural schools began to close.
Well, there just wasn't enough children in the community, I think. And they just consolidated and went to Madrid.
All of these factors began to affect church attendance.
Oh yes, I remember a time when the membership, maybe not the membership as much as the attendance, because of the fact that the school children were being bused to Madrid, and that it changed the whole situation.
In 1968, attendance was at an all-time low in both the Evangelical United Brethren and the Methodist churches. In an effort to save both organizations, national church leaders made the decision to merge the two bodies, and the United Methodist Church was born. For some of the people of Hopkins Grove, this was a difficult time. Twice in the past, the community had chosen to remain United Brethren, and now the decision was out of their hands. The farming community of Hopkins Grove continued to change. The abundance of the land was wearing away. It took more and more money to buy bigger machinery. Fewer and fewer members of the church were farmers. Across the country, the small rural churches were being abandoned. As the churches closed, some of the faithful drove to big churches in the towns and cities, but many others would simply become unaffiliated. In Hopkins Grove, it was winter again. As church attendance fell, barely enough money came in to pay the bills. The membership held worship in the basement, unable to afford heat for the sanctuary.
There weren't many younger people back in 20 years ago. And we didn't have very big crowds, and sometimes it was just a little shaky. You didn't know if we were going to continue or not, financially or otherwise.
By 1981, average church attendance had fallen to 20. But the remaining few would not let go of the hope that the church would once again be a center of faith for the community. By 1985, several new families had moved to the Hopkins Grove neighborhood. They were not farmers, but had been drawn to the quiet countryside in search of community. The improved transportation that aided migration to the cities was now allowing city workers to live in the countryside. Gradually, new faces began to appear in the pews on Sunday. For the first time in years, cards went out inviting the children to Bible school.
Because I thought the kids that John was 4 at that time and Annie was 3, and I thought they needed to get together with other kids in the neighborhood and need to get to know them better. So that's kind of the reason why I did it. And we were still going to church in Des Moines, and so it was, a long ways to Des Moines to go to church. So I thought it would just be fun to get together for the neighborhood kids to have Bible school. Well, we do lots of different unique things at Hopkins Grove Sunday School, and I think partly we can do that because we're a real small group, and so we can do whatever we want to. And I think one of the main things we've done is create a lot of traditions for the kids. And I think that's one thing that a lot of children don't have nowadays, where they have a lot of things that are the same from time to time. In the fall, when we start our Sunday school, we always celebrate Rosh Hashanah, and we walk down to the creek that's right by church, and they throw their bread in the river and throw away their sins and think about the new year that's coming up. In the spring, we go and pick lilacs down by the lake and bring them into church and decorate the church with those. Another thing we do is we always have our Easter egg hunt every year. And that started out real small with just a few children. And we had hard-boiled eggs and we hid them. And every year it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, now we decorate about 30 dozen eggs, hard-boiled eggs. And then we have 2 dozen golden eggs or silver eggs. And we hide them in the cemetery, and then the kids all go and find them. And that's been something we've been doing for like 8 years now. And even though our kids are getting older, they're 12 or 13, they still want to be a part of the Easter egg hunt. So it's been a real special thing for all of them. And at Christmas, we have a Christmas program like most churches do. Other than I think our kids have all got to be all the main characters in the Christmas program. So it's pretty much a tradition for them to do that kind of thing too. And I think that's the main thing, that they learn most from example of seeing what we do. And it's not so much what we say or what we teach them about the stories, it's that we're there and we care about that they are there.
Bring up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he shall not depart from it.
Spring has returned once more to the Grove.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night.
And I can remember when my folks got a brand new Edison phonograph. And these records were about 1/4 of an inch thick. And, oh, they had all kinds of things, that records, different stories and things. There were a lot of storytellers and things on them. And everybody had a telephone. And they would make a line ring so that everybody would pick up the phone. And I remember my folks used to leave the receiver down and play the phonograph, and everybody could listen to the phonograph on the party line. And that was one of our earliest entertainments.